we've got a quick kind of few slides on Azure Site Recovery, and then we can kind of open it to questions. So we'll be talking about kind of what is Azure Site Recovery, the benefits of Azure Site Recovery, the cost of implementing Azure Site Recovery, or what it costs to host it in Azure, and also who it's actually for, so how you can benefit if you're on premises or in Azure. So what are the benefits? So basically a method of replicating your on-premises infrastructure to Azure to provide data center resiliency, but also, you know, if you're already in Azure, you can use Azure Site Recovery as well. So as I say, Azure Site Recovery can be from on-premises, from your on-prem data center to Azure. It can actually be from on-premises to another on-premises data center as well, or it can be from Azure region if you're already in Azure to another region. And kind of a few of the benefits, so cost-effective disaster recovery. So I think, you know, here, if you're paying for another kind of physical data center, it can get quite expensive, and you might think that, you know, you're paying for a secondary data center, but not all of your resources need high availability or, you know, resiliency against the disaster. So, you know, Azure Site Recovery kind of offers you that flexibility to only protect certain resources. Another really good one, so test failovers. Before you actually do the failover to Azure, or do like a DR failover, if you're doing it with a physical data center, you're going to have to kind of require some kind of downtime to do this. Azure Site Recovery gives you the ability to do a test one, so it will actually copy the disks up to Azure, and it will spin up a test instance, which is exactly the same, just using a different IP, and it doesn't require you to turn off your on-premises infrastructure, so you can kind of create a separate virtual network which is completely isolated from anything connecting to your on-premises, and then you can just change your DNS to point to that new IP address, and that gives you a really good way of testing that, you know, in the event of an outage, or, you know, for peace of mind for the business, you know that your application is going to run in Azure perfectly well whilst you've you know, trying to fix the problems on premises. And also, you know, if you do like a monthly recovery plan just to make sure your DR is working, it's quite good that you haven't got to switch off your on-premises infrastructure every month just to test this. You can do that with a test failover. Automated failovers as well, so you can create recovery plans within Azure. So a recovery plan is basically, you know, what happens when your on-premises infrastructure goes down. So you could get it to automatically fail over to Azure if it notices that your on-premises infrastructure is down. So that's really good for some environments, but it's not so good if, you know, if you're planning a downtime. You don't want your infrastructure to be spun up automatically in Azure. So there's pros and cons to both of them, but it's nice the fact that you know, we can put them in place, and the idea of this really is to reduce as much as the human you know, impact or human effort to do these failovers. We want to make it as automated as possible, and, you know, you can also have kind of automation accounts as well. So the way we've seen this work before is if you've got a web server that's that needs a public IP address, but obviously it's not, the web server hasn't failed over to Azure yet, you could use an automation kind of PowerShell script within the recovery plan that will create that public IP, and then after that it will kind of do the failover from on-premises to Azure. So it means that, you know, any web servers that you've got, we're reducing the amount of downtime by preempting things and you know, filling out the prerequisites so that when the server does fall over to Azure, it can spin up as soon as possible, and you know, your business as usual can continue. Also worth, kind of slightly off topic but still around Azure Site Recovery, so thinking about kind of DNS load balancers in Azure. So one of the things we see most often when we do this for customers is, you know, when we fail over from on-premises to Azure, you know, you've got DNS propagation. So obviously when you go to Azure, your IP address is going to change. So you know, thinking about using something called Traffic Manager. So Traffic Manager is basically a DNS load balancer that will scan your on-premises IP address, kind of probing it to make sure it's healthy. You know, if in the event your on-premises goes down, Traffic Manager will be smart enough to know to point all of your kind of DNS requests to the Azure side. So it means you haven't got to go into kind of any external DNS providers and make changes and then wait a few hours for propagation. This makes it really quick and kind of reduces the amount of downtime required. and also hybrid experience as well. So it's important to remember that not all customers have faith in the cloud yet, and that's absolutely fine. And not everyone wants to move straight away. So it could be that the first stepping stone of your move into Azure is putting your DR environment there and doing the test failovers and making sure that you're confident that your applications will spin up. And then your next stepping stone after that might be, you've got a bit more confidence to trust Azure with the migrations, and any business critical applications, for example, can be tested before move to Azure. So it's really good in that respect too. And just one final kind of touch really before we move on to the costs. Azure Site Recovery isn't just for DR purposes, so you can also use it to replicate machines to Azure and failover as part of a migration experience. And along with that comes the test failovers. So you might have a business critical application that you want to test without any downtime, so you can move that with a test failover. Or it will choose a different name, different IP address. It won't be linked to your on-premises DNS, so there won't be any business impact, and then you can ask some of your members of staff to test that the application moves, and then you can do the production migration afterwards. So it's really good that we've got that kind of functionality to use as well. So the cost of Azure Site Recovery, so the first 31 days is free. So when we look at, if you want to try this before you buy it, for example, or also if you're doing these test migrations or making sure that migrations work before moving to Azure, or even if you're going to do the migration of your production systems within 31 days, it's good to know that this is free. So if you remove the replication before 31 days, you won't get any charge at all. After 31 days, the cost is around £18.63 per instance protected. So that's whether you're doing migration or DR purposes. It's still replication from on-premises to Azure. So that's the cost for each node or each server you'd like to protect. And along comes that some of the more minor costs, but storage costs. So when Azure Site Recovery works, how it works, it will copy the disks up to a storage account for when it needs it for spinning up the servers in Azure. So if you've got a few terabytes or 10, 15 terabytes worth of disk data, that's what you'll be charged for in Azure. And also network costs. So ingress charges to Azure is free, but the egress charges, although very minor, unless you've got a lot of data going out of the data center, that is a small cost that you need to factor for. So yeah, we've already touched on it, but who can benefit from Azure Site Recovery? So anyone looking to migrate the infrastructure to Azure. So you might want to test the water. You might want to make sure that things work smoothly before you incur any downtime. It could make trying to convince the business owners or business application owners you've got a really good use case if you can say that you can test this first before moving it. Anyone paying for an on-prem data center, saving time and money. I'm sure that everyone's been kind of through the process of driving hundreds of miles just to test their data center that's used for DR purposes. Not only does it cost a lot, it takes a lot of human effort to human effort and time to go and test that. So the fact that we can do that in Azure is really good benefit. And of course it's all automated as well, or it can be mostly automated, depends on how much automation you'd like to use and how much control you want over it. So it can be as much in as little time as you want to spend on that. But also, we haven't really touched on it much, but regional failure. So Microsoft offer like 99.99% uptime kind of SLA if you use Azure Site Recovery. So if you've got any virtual machines that are running in one region, for example UK South, you may want to make sure that if UK South unlikely did have a regional outage, you can actually protect them in a different region, so UK West, or you could go to West Europe, for example. And yeah, then machines will be replicated over to that region, and if you ever needed to fail them over, it's the same kind of process. It's just nice to know we can do Azure to Azure. Okay, so that's everything on kind of optimization, automation, and Azure Site Recovery. I'll leave the call open if anyone wants to ask any questions for the next 10 minutes or so. And, if there is any questions, please go ahead and ask. And also as well after the call, if anyone's got any questions, you're more than welcome to get in touch with Cloud Direct or myself, and we can kind of help you with any concerns you've got. So thank you very much.
Yeah, I can see they've got a couple of questions here. There's one coming earlier. Does site recovery encrypt replication?
Yeah, so as I mentioned earlier, so site recovery is basically taking your disks and moving them to Azure, or taking a copy of them anyway, and moving them to Azure, and keeps them in a storage account. So the storage accounts are encrypted at rest using AES 256-bit. So that's yeah, obviously kind of peace of mind, making sure that they're encrypted. So that's really good, and also, you know, if we're talking about Azure site recovery from one region to another, that's encrypted and in transit as well, encrypted across regions. So that's really good. And around ARM templates spanning Azure regions. So yeah, ARM templates are kind of deployed at a resource group level and a subscription level. So you know, if you've got subscriptions in different regions, the resources that you're using or creating with them ARM templates will be targeted at a subscription level. So you know, you can't deploy an ARM template to UK West and UK South within the same template. But what you can do is create two different templates, and you could put them into Azure DevOps, for example. So you can use Azure DevOps to deploy the UK South one first, and then UK West after that. And again, you can have approval gates on that to make sure it's deployed successfully to the first region before you do a separate region.
That's great. Are there any more questions? Brilliant. I think we'll take them. If there are any more questions, we can take those offline. That was great. Thank you, Matt. And
that's all right.
We've been recording this webinar, so we'll if there's any of your colleagues or anyone else that you wanted to share this with, we'll send around the recording. Either it'll be later this afternoon or early tomorrow morning. And yeah, please do get in touch if you have any follow-up questions or would like to speak to Matt more.
Yep, I'm happy to help.
Wonderful. Thank you for joining. We'll end it there.
Brilliant. Thank you, everyone.